At the Anaheim Convention Center on a Thursday afternoon in October of 2003, the floor smelled of sweat and rubber matting, and the particular kind of ambition that gathers when 600 fighters share the same enclosed space. The event was a regional mixed martial arts expo, 2 days of seminars and sparring demonstrations, and by the second afternoon the energy had changed. It had the quality of air before a storm, not dangerous exactly but charged. The kind of charge that makes the back of your neck feel it before your mind does. There were 612 people in the main hall that day. That number matters, because every one of them would carry what happened next out of that building, and into the rest of their lives. In the next 11 seconds, with 4 movements, Chuck Norris would demonstrate something that 600 trained fighters would spend the next 2 decades trying to describe accurately. Most of them would fail, not because the memory was unclear, because the words did not exist yet for what they had seen. Nobody in that hall believed they were about to witness history. Some of them barely noticed when he walked in. The man at the center of the room was not Chuck Norris, not at first. At first, the center of the room belonged to a man named Dario Vasquez, and it belonged to him completely, and he had earned every inch of it. Vasquez was 31 years old that October, 6 feet 2. 219 pounds of muscle organized with the kind of precision that comes from 11 years of professional competition. He had fought in 3 continents. He had won a regional kickboxing title at 24, and a submission grappling championship at 27, and had been listed in 3 separate fighting publications as one of the most technically complete competitors of his generation. His left leg was a weapon that coaches in 3 countries had studied on tape. His ground game had ended the careers of men who had entered the cage as favorites. He was not a fraud. He was not overconfident in the way of men who have never been tested. He had been tested. He had passed. He had passed repeatedly, in front of crowds and cameras and people whose opinion in the fighting world meant something permanent. That is what made what happened worth remembering. Vasquez was in the middle of a seminar on pressure fighting. He had 40 students arranged in a half circle around him on the mats, and he was demonstrating the mechanics of forward momentum, how to use a larger man's own mass against him, and he was doing it well. The students were attentive. The instructors along the wall were nodding. There was a journalist from a regional sports outlet sitting in the 3rd row of folding chairs with a notepad open on his knee, and he had already written the word commanding twice. It was at the end of this demonstration, when the applause had settled but before the next segment had begun, that Dario Vasquez picked up the wireless microphone from its stand by the mat's edge. He had not been given a microphone for what came next. He picked it up on his own. He turned toward the back of the hall where a small group of men in street clothes had entered through a side door 7 minutes earlier and taken seats in the 4th row from the back. One of them was wearing a plain gray jacket buttoned at the top over dark jeans and simple shoes. He was not dressed for the event. He was not dressed for attention of any kind. He had a cap on. He was sitting with his hands in his lap, watching the demonstration with an expression that contained nothing particular. He looked like someone's uncle who had been brought along out of politeness. Dario Vasquez pointed in that direction. "I want to be respectful," he said. And the speakers in the rafters carried his voice to every corner of the hall. "I want to say that everything these old school guys built, what they did in the 70s and 80s, it was real for its time. We owe them something. I genuinely believe that. But fighting has evolved. The science has evolved. And I think if some of the legends from that era were honest with themselves, they would admit that what worked then would not work now." He paused. "I respect Chuck Norris. I do. What he accomplished in a different era was real. But the game has moved. And if he walked out on this mat today, I think we would all see that some things belong to history." The hall went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of shock. The quiet of held breath. The quiet of 200 people who understood exactly what had just been said, and who were now looking at the 4th row from the back. The man in the gray jacket and the cap had not moved. He was still sitting with his hands in his lap. He was 63 years old. If you want to find out what happened in the next 11 seconds, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Because what Chuck Norris did next, what he said after, and the sentence that Dario Vasquez would repeat to his students for the next 20 years, none of that is in any record. It lived in the memory of 600 people in a hall in Anaheim, and it started with a man taking off his jacket. He stood up without hurry. That was the first thing people noticed. Not what he did, but the absence of anything sharp in the doing of it. He did not push back his chair with force. He did not rise quickly. He moved the way a man moves when he has decided something privately and the decision is already finished, and what follows is simply the walking out of what has already been determined internally. He reached up and removed the cap from his head. He held it for a moment. He folded it once and set it on the seat behind him. Then he removed the gray jacket. He folded that too, with the same absence of theater, and placed it on the back of the chair. Beneath the jacket was a plain white t-shirt. He was wearing street shoes. He walked toward the mat. The recognition did not happen all at once. It moved through the hall the way a signal moves through a length of wire, one section lighting before the next, and then the next, and then the next. It started somewhere in the middle rows, where a man who had grown up watching a particular set of films sat up straighter without meaning to, and the woman beside him turned to look at what he was looking at, and the two men behind her shifted in their seats, and the journalist with the notepad stopped writing. By the time he reached the edge of the mat, the current had moved through all 612 people in the room. Not one of them made a sound. He had already lost. Dario Vasquez had already lost. He just did not know it yet. This is the thing about genuinely great fighters that people who have never been in the presence of one do not understand until it is too late to understand it usefully. The outcome is not in the movement. It is not in the technique. It is in the quality of stillness that precedes both. Dario Vasquez was watching a 63-year-old man in street shoes cross a mat toward him, and every analytical system his 11 years of professional training had built was telling him the same thing. This was manageable. The age differential alone was a gap that training science did not permit to be closed. The footwear alone was a tactical liability. The posture, relaxed to the point of appearing casual, registered to Vasquez's trained eye as the posture of a man not ready to engage at competition speed. He was reading the right signals. He was drawing the wrong conclusions. Chuck Norris stopped, 12 feet away. He did not adopt a stance. He did not raise his hands. He did not perform the small rituals of preparation that fighters use to tell the room and themselves that they are shifting into a different mode. He stood the way he had been standing when he crossed the mat. Feet at roughly shoulder width, weight distributed, hands at his sides. He looked at Dario Vasquez with an expression that was neither unfriendly nor warm. It was the expression of a man who has been asked a question and is giving it appropriate thought before answering. He said 2 words, "Show me." That was all. Dario Vasquez's head instructor, a man named Pemberton who had trained 3 regional champions and who was standing against the left wall with his arms crossed, later said that when he heard those 2 words he felt something that he could not name for several days afterward. He said, "It was not fear." I want to be clear about that. It was recognition. It was the feeling of recognizing something old, something that the sport had moved past in terms of its vocabulary but that still existed somewhere. Like seeing a word you had forgotten that you knew. Pemberton did not move. His arms stayed crossed. But his hands, which were folded inside those crossed arms, tightened. Vasquez moved first. A fight is not 2 men hitting each other. This is the misunderstanding that costs people the most. The ones who have studied fighting as a sport but not yet as a negotiation between 2 bodies in a shared space. A fight is a conversation about distance. It is a debate with no words conducted in the language of geometry, about who controls the space between 2 bodies, and who is forced to operate inside someone else's preferred geometry. The man who sets the distance wins the fight. This is the principle, and it is the principle that every great defensive fighter in history has understood, and that almost no one in any sport can explain to a civilian with accuracy. You feel it more often than you see it. You see it in the outcomes. You rarely see it in the doing. What happened next was a lesson in distance. It lasted 11 seconds. The first second, Vasquez closed from 12 feet to 7 with a step and a half, leading with his right shoulder, which was his tell. Coaches in his corner had identified this tell the previous year. He never corrected it. Most opponents moved back when he closed. Chuck Norris did not move. The second, Vasquez reached 7 feet and committed his left leg to a thigh kick, which was his opening statement in most exchanges. The thing he used to establish range and to read how a man moved under pressure. It was a legitimate technique, deployed with professional power. It covered the distance in less than 0.4 of a second. It did not land. Chuck Norris moved 4 inches to the left, not backward. Left, the kick passed 4 inches from his right leg. He was now 6 feet from Vasquez and slightly to the outside of his dominant hand. And the second row of folding chairs, a woman named Renata, who was a judo instructor from a gym in the valley and who had brought 3 of her students to the expo, leaned forward in her seat. She said nothing. Her right hand, which had been resting in her lap, came up and pressed flat against her sternum. She stayed that way for the remainder of the 11 seconds. The third second, Vasquez recognized the miss and adjusted. He brought his left foot back and shifted his weight to the right, which was the technically correct response, and threw a right-hand combination intended to close the range difference and establish contact. 2 punches, both thrown with the kind of accuracy that does not come from instinct. It comes from 11 years. Neither of them landed. Chuck Norris was no longer standing where the punches were going. He had moved. Not away. The movement was lateral and slightly forward, which is the movement that makes no sense to a man expecting retreat, because retreat is the logical response to a combination from a younger and larger opponent. Retreat is what the math suggests. Chuck Norris was not retreating. He was inside Vasquez's right elbow, which is the only place on the mat where a right-hand combination does not exist as a threat. He did not block it. He did not parry it. He was simply not there. The tournament director, a man named Aldworth who had been running regional events for 19 years, and who was standing at the side of the mat with a clipboard that he had stopped looking at approximately 5 seconds earlier, put the clipboard down on a folding table without looking for the table. He found it. His eyes did not leave the mat. The fourth second, Vasquez pivoted to adjust to the new position. Chuck Norris was now behind his right shoulder, and Vasquez was turning to reacquire him. This pivot was fast. This pivot was the correct move. In a competition context, in a cage with rules and rounds and judges, this pivot was the right answer to the problem. This was not a competition. And the problem was already over. The fifth and sixth seconds, Chuck Norris moved forward as Vasquez turned. He did not lead with his hands. He used a single low kick, delivered not to the body, but to the mat, beside Vasquez's left foot, 3 inches from it, with enough velocity to disrupt the balance of the pivot without making contact. Vasquez's weight shifted wrong. He caught himself. But the moment it took him to catch himself was the moment. The 7th second, the right hand. The only thing Chuck Norris threw with direct intention in the entire 11 seconds. Not a full strike, a half measure, controlled from the shoulder with his body behind it, aimed with complete precision at the point 3 inches below Vasquez's left ear. He launched it from a distance of 19 inches. It stopped. 1 inch. 1 measured, deliberate inch from contact. Vasquez's body understood what had happened before his mind did. The instinct that 11 years of training builds works faster than the mind it lives inside, and what that instinct communicated in the 7th second was a single piece of information: this was over. Not the exchange. Not the demonstration. The conversation about distance was over. And it had been over. In truth, from the second. From the moment the thigh kick missed, and the geometry changed. And every second since then had been a lesson being delivered to a man who did not realize the class had already begun. In the 8th second, Vasquez was still. The right hand was still 1 inch from his ear. Chuck Norris did not step back. He did not lower his hand quickly. He held the position for exactly 2 seconds, which is a long time when you are the man receiving the lesson, and a very particular kind of long time when you are one of the 612 people watching it from a chair. Then he withdrew his hand. He extended it, open-palmed, fingers together, at chest height. Renata's hand, which had been pressed against her sternum for 8 seconds, came down to her knee. She said nothing. She did not look at anyone beside her. She looked at the mat. Later she would say that she was not sure she had taken a full breath in half a minute. Pemberton, against the left wall, had uncrossed his arms at the 4th second. He was standing with his arms at his sides and his chin tilted 2 degrees upward, which was not a conscious choice. His body had made it for him. The journalist had his pen in his hand. He had not written anything in 60 seconds. He would write. Later that evening in his notes, "I have been covering this sport for 9 years. I do not know what I saw. I know it was finished before I understood it was starting." Dario Vizquez looked at the open hand. He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he took it. Chuck Norris stepped close, so that what he said next was for Vizquez only. And the 600 people in the hall could see that words were being spoken, but could not hear them. He spoke for perhaps 4 seconds. Then he stepped back. He did not smile before what he said. He did not smile after it. He turned. He walked toward the 4th row from the back. He picked up the gray jacket from the chair. He did not put it on. He carried it. He picked up the cap and put it back on his head. He sat down. Vizquez stood on the mat alone for approximately 8 seconds. The hall was still carrying that particular silence, the one that had arrived in the 7th second and had not left. Then he picked up the microphone, which was still on the mat near the edge where he had set it down before any of this had begun. He said, "I owe someone an apology, and I am making it in public, because that is where I made the error." He looked toward the 4th row from the back. He said, "I used the wrong word. I said old school. What I should have said was foundational. There is a difference, and the difference matters, and I understand it now." He set the microphone down. There was a sound in the hall then. Not applause, exactly, it was something more considered than applause. It was the sound of 600 people exhaling. 3 days after that October afternoon, the story began to move. It traveled the way stories from closed rooms travel, person by person, corridor by corridor, with the details shifting slightly in each retelling the way a signal accumulates noise over a long wire. By the end of the first week, the 11 seconds had become 6 in some versions, and 30 in others. By the end of the second week, someone had added a second kick that had not been thrown, and someone else had removed the extended hand. By the first month, 3 different cities claimed the event for themselves. But certain things held. The things that held across every version of the story, regardless of who was telling it and in what city and to how many people, were these. The man in the gray jacket and the cap, the folded jacket on the chair, the movement that was not retreat, the hand that stopped 1 inch short, and what Vizquez said when he picked up the microphone. Those things held because they were the essential things. The details that memory keeps longest are the ones that carry meaning beyond themselves. Pemberton, the head instructor who had trained 3 regional champions and who had stood against the left wall with his arms crossed and then uncrossed, included that afternoon in a curriculum document he wrote 6 years later for his advanced students. He did not name names. He described the exchange in mechanical terms, footwork and positioning and the geometry of distance control. At the end of the description he wrote one sentence that had nothing to do with mechanics. He wrote, "The man who sets the distance decides the outcome. The man who waits for the outcome has already ceded the distance." His students asked him where the quote came from. He told them he had written it himself. This was true. He had written it 6 years after watching it demonstrated in 11 seconds on a mat in Anaheim. Renata, the judo instructor from the Valley, taught a class on Kazushi the following spring, the principle of breaking balance before the throw, and used what she had seen on that Thursday afternoon as her central example. She did not name the people. She described the mechanics. She described the 4-inch movement to the left, The lateral shift instead of retreat, the way the geometry changed before the exchange had properly begun. She told her students, "You do not win a fight by fighting. You win it by making the other person fight your fight. That is a different thing, and it is learned with years, not weeks." Her students practiced the 4-inch movement for the rest of that class. Aldworth, the tournament director who had set down his clipboard on the folding table without looking for it, continued running regional events for 11 more years. People who knew him said that at every event when two particularly capable fighters were on the mat together, he became briefly, unusually still.
Not distracted. Still in the way of a man who is comparing what he is watching to something he has kept filed carefully in a very particular part of his memory. He never explained it to anyone. He did not need to. Dario Vizquez continued competing for 4 more years. He won 2 more regional titles. He retired at 35 with a record that,
in any honest assessment of the sport's regional landscape during that decade, placed him among the more complete fighters of his generation. He never spoke about that Thursday afternoon in interviews. He spoke about it constantly in his gym. He used it the way good teachers use the thing that changed them, not as a story about someone else's greatness, but as a story about what you think you know and what knowing something actually requires. He had one phrase he used when a student became too certain too quickly. He would say, "Precision is not the same as accuracy. Precision means you can repeat something. Accuracy means you can aim it. Neither one means you understand the space you are working inside." His students heard this phrase many times over the years. None of them for many years knew where it came from. There is a specific kind of lesson that can only be delivered at speed and in the presence of witnesses. Books contain information, seminars contain instruction, but the thing that reorganizes the way a person sees a field they have worked in for years, that thing requires a moment. It requires 11 seconds and 19 inches and a hand that stops 1 inch from contact. The private sentence, the 4 words that Chuck Norris spoke to Dario Vizquez in those 4 seconds on the mat in Anaheim, standing close enough that no microphone could capture them, was reported by Vizquez to only one person, his own head instructor, 7 years after the event. In a conversation that the instructor later described as one of the most direct exchanges he had been party to in his professional life. What Vizquez told him Chuck Norris had said was this: "The distance was mine." 4 words. No elaboration, no instruction attached to them, no moral appended. Just a statement of what had been true from the second onward, offered quietly to a man who had just understood it through his body before he understood it through his mind. The distance was mine. It was not a boast. It was a measurement. It was the most accurate thing said on a mat in Anaheim that October, in a hall full of fighters and instructors and one journalist who would not write what he had seen for 6 more years. Because for 6 years he did not have the vocabulary for it. The world did not stop for what happened in that hall. Traffic moved on the boulevard outside. The vendors in the lobby continued selling equipment from folding tables. The other seminars continued in the adjacent rooms, the sounds of impacts and instructions muffled through the walls. None of that paused. None of it registered what had changed inside that particular room, in the 4th row from the back, where a man in a plain white t-shirt and street shoes had taken 11 seconds to answer a question that had been posed in a microphone in front of 600 people. The world's indifference was the frame. What mattered was what happened inside it. What you know about a man, and what a man is, are not the same document. This is the lesson that every version of this story, in every city where it traveled over the following 2 decades, carried at its center, even when the tellers added details that were not there, and removed ones that were, even when the 11 seconds became 6 or 30, even when the city changed. The lesson held. What Dario Vizquez knew about Chuck Norris in October of 2003 was his age, his era, his reputation in a genre of film that had made him famous, and his legacy in a form of karate competition that the sport had moved beyond. What Vizquez knew was real, it was accurate, it was insufficient. What is known and what is true are two different inventories. A wise man checks both before he picks up a microphone. Next week, we will look at the afternoon in Las Vegas when a boxing promoter told Chuck Norris that martial arts had no place in a fighting man's life. What happened in the next 4 minutes in a gym hallway, and what the promoter said to his own son 17 years later, is a story that has never been told in full. We will tell it in full. Make sure you are here for it.